Welcome everybody, as the American Space Museum is at the Moore Cultural Center and Museum, just 4 miles from our downtown Titusville Museum in Mims. I am standing in what we consider the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, and you're going to hear a little bit about that, as the American Space Museum is proud to partner with the Moore Center and Museum for a little program on diversity. And I will say up front that trying to plan this in December was not as much fun as you might think for an event. And such is life, but we're putting a program together we hope lasts during Black History Month. And we'll do something like this every year, as this is a great partnership here with everybody. I want to introduce Sonia Mallard. Sonia is the cultural coordinator. And I want her to speak a few words about this Brevard County facility here. Sonia, tell us how long you've been with the Moore Center and how this came about, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Mallard. I'm the Cultural Center Coordinator, and I've been fortunate to have not even a job, just to follow my passion. And I've been here 7 years now.
Great. Well, and this is a county facility. Okay.
Yes, this is a county.
Brevard County's facility, we want to emphasize.
Brevard County facility, and I'm proud to say that my boss is here, Mr. Jeff Davis, and his lovely wife, Miss Jeff Davis, Miss Carol Davis, and he runs the North Area Parks and Recreation and ensures that we're innovative and creative and can do all that we want. Our team, Cassandra Wright and myself, along with other team members, we're proud to bring to you the history and the legacy of the Moores. And so I will bring up Cassandra Wright, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the Moores.
I'm going to introduce her just a second there, because I wanted to set this up a little bit better. Not better, but I want to set up the passion that they have for their museum is the same passion that the American Space Museum was founded on. And I have my boss in the audience here, who I lovingly call our godfather, Charlie Mars. And this whole museum started with the handprints of the astronauts from Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, when a dentist in Titusville said, he went to the Grauman's Chinese Theater and he said it'd be a great idea to have the astronauts' handprints out there. And it was during a Renaissance period for downtown. It was in 1999. And Mr. Mars was instrumental in getting over 2/3 of the 30-some astronauts from Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo over there. And it's a beautiful homage to the space history, and we hope you enjoy that. But out of that sprung our museum. In fact, I brought Joe Ingles' handprints here. He is the only man ever to fly 2 space planes. And so you might say, the space shuttle, okay, what's the other space plane? Well, that was to be the X-15. He flew to the edge of space and back. And Joe, I think, is 88 years old. And but this is what we're passionate about. We're also passionate about another thing. As I hold in my hand a coin, this coin contains metal that went to the moon on Eagle lander that Marty Winkle, my cameraman, co-producer, hey Marty, he's working the camera there. He looked outside of those windows of that lunar module number 5 as he did his work as an electrical engineer on the Cape side here for Grumman. But I bring this up because it contains metals actually to the moon. Wasn't that beautiful moon the other day we saw and so forth? And one of our guests today is going to talk to us about going back to the moon. But why I'm showing this is this metal started here in Brevard County when it was loaded on pad 39A over there at Kennedy Space Center. And here I am in Brevard County holding that piece of the moon here. This is our heritage of the county like none other, all right? The only place in the world where we've launched humans to the moon and are planning to do it again. And this is what our museum is about, is we want all the kids to understand growing up in their county what a legacy this is like none other. And I spent 35 years in the coal fields of Tennessee, and that's in 6 states and 30 counties. We got a lot of great heritage, in other words, all over our country, but none like Brevard County. And I'm proud to carry this around and remind people that this is who represents you. So go in and put your handprints on Joe Ingles there. We've got, for those of you in the audience, we've got some Tang and moon pies always to celebrate our events here. And I wanted to, if we can pan out a little bit, we've got a panel discussion with Art Edwards, who's worked over 50 years as a contractor. He is a safety management consultant now, is involved with the remote manipulator arm on the shuttle, and then segued into the safety and that. And then we have Laura Poliah. Laura is an Artemis era, she works as the Orion text execution engineer. She's a lead engineer on Orion. All right, so tell us a little bit about that. But this lady's been involved 10 years or more in our Orion space program. And we do encourage y'all to ask a question or two out there, particularly watching us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Spotify, okay? But I did want to mention Laura, and we're going to post this later today or tomorrow on our Facebook site, was on the Today Show with 3 other outstanding women in there. And we've got a comment.
No,
go ahead.
You were introducing the person behind you.
Right. That's exactly right. Okay. So I want really our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Spotify people to understand what a historic place we're sitting in here. This is the birthplace of the civil rights movement, and I'm going to have Karshanda is going to come up and tell you a little about that. But what I want to emphasize is, what strikes me about this wonderful museum is that we transpose history between the Space Museum and the Moore Center and Museum here. We're both the birthplaces of things. In 1951, the Moores were murdered in this house over here, just recreated, just a few blocks, just 100 yards from us. There is a news clip in their little museum in here that says, "Moore not afraid to die." And he was just like our Mercury astronauts. They weren't afraid to die, just like any astronaut that goes to space. That fear of dying has long left them in their training and so forth. They're ready to go. But that is one of my favorite little things in this museum, that Harry Moore was not afraid to die, and therefore his wife wasn't afraid to die because she was a big partner in his life there. So 60 years ago tomorrow, no one's going to celebrate this, a man that was not afraid to die. John Glenn was launched 60 years ago tomorrow, February 20th, 1962. All right, what was it, pad 18? No, 14. 14 out there. So we'll see if the news picks up on that at all. But this is what I love about this place and the Moores, and 70 years later, we're still talking about the struggles that they gave their lives for. So with that, without any further ado there, I want to bring up Karshanda Wright, and she's going to outline a little bit about this Moore history, Karshanda, and then we're going to get to our panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Good morning. Well, afternoon now, I guess we're mid-morning.
No, almost.
Mid-morning. So I'm going to talk to you about the history of the Moores. So we do have an overturn when it comes to the Moores. And I always look at them, because I have 6 kids, believe it or not, as a family. And when you look at them, I have to look at them as a family, because you had to know that they had to have an uncomfortable conversation at some point in their life, right? Because they had 2 girls, right? They had 2 girls that they were raising. They also were a man and wife. They were school teachers. He was a principal. He definitely had to have a, thirst for making sure that civic engagement was part of his family. But ultimately, he had to sit his wife down and talk to her about what they were going to do as a family. And I say as a family because when you start an adventure, if the wife is not on board, it doesn't happen, right? It does not go down. Like, if mom says no, it's no, right? And so he had to have a conversation with his wife. And by all means, they were very comfortable. Remember, they lived on a 4-acre orange grove. They were both school teachers and college educated. And they were selling their oranges to the local packing house, which meant that they had extra income. So they were good. But they wanted to make it easier for the next generation. And they could have minded their own business and lived out to their ripe old age and just did nothing. If it had not been for the fact that they were really interested in making sure the next generation did not have a hard time achieving the American dream. So instead, he had a conversation with his wife about what they were going to do. And they made the decision that they were going to, as a family, embark on a journey that would ultimately take their life. So we look at them very differently than I would look at any other couple, because as a mother, my first inclination is going to be to protect my children. So she had to have such faith in him that he was going to be there and cover her girls in order for her to take this journey with him. And she took it willingly and always stood by his side, not complaining, holding him up when he was falling, making sure that they were a family first. And that is, there are always a woman holding their hand, making sure that they are the partner to them and ensuring that they continue what they both saw as a journey that they needed to complete. Mr. Moore and his wife fought against a lot of things, okay? So when we look at them, we're not just looking at a couple, we're looking at a family that was so entrenched in making sure that civic engagement was part of the Black experience in this area. In the rural South, where people were getting lynched for just signing up to vote, they took that time to make sure, hey, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this together as a family. And they taught their girls to give speeches. They were very civically engaged, but more importantly, they registered people to vote here in Brevard County. So we see they started the NAACP that was able to morph into another organization that was partisan that was called the Progressive Voters League. In that Progressive Voters League is where they were able to register over 116,000 Black Americans to vote. Not only did they register them to vote, but they took them to the polls to exercise this right to vote, changing the political makeup of Florida. Of course, there's always opposition, as you can see, but they definitely investigated lynchings. Now, you probably don't know this, but Florida had the highest number of lynchings per capita than any southern state, which meant if you were a Black person here, you were more likely to get lynched in this state than any other southern state that you lived in. And that is probably something most people don't know. We so closely associate these types of activities with Alabama or Mississippi that we don't realize that Florida was really part of that history too. Now, we're going to talk about why Mr. Moore and his wife were killed. Well, they had started the NAACP. They were instrumental in getting people to vote, and they were so civically engaged that they investigated all kinds of activities like police involvement with crimes against people, right, in the United States. So they had decided that they were taking interest, along with Thurgood Marshall, in a case about the Groveland Four. Now, the Groveland Four have been accused of rape and assault of Norma Pageant. Governor DeSantis actually pardoned the Groveland Four when he took the first week in office, and as of November of 2021, the family went after exoneration. And because of this, we are able to say that this crime really did not occur. Now, these four gentlemen who were minding their own business, one who was waiting on a bus, two who were getting off work, and one who was just coming back from a club. They were just minding their own business when they were taken into custody. One actually was able to get on the bus and make it to Jacksonville before he was lynched by a mob led by Sheriff Willis McCall, who was the Lake County Sheriff where this crime allegedly took place. Now, when after that, the three gentlemen who were arrested, which are Charlie Greenlee, Walter Irving, and Samuel Shepard, are arrested not on the crime of assault and rape, but they are arrested on the crime of resisting arrest. Because Norma Pageant nor her husband ever make a statement or appear in court. Instead, 3 days later, when they have the trial, Norma Pageant's father and police officers testify to what they think happened. And then we have Mr. Moore, because they are taken to the jail, they get a new trial. Now, they don't actually give Greenlee a new trial because Greenlee gets life in prison and he's 16 years old, and they're fearful that he will actually get the death penalty. So instead, they give Irving and Shepard a new trial. They appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and when they get the decision to have the new trial, Mr. McCall, who was the sheriff that arrested them for this alleged crime in the first place, takes them to their new trial. In this new trial, he transports them in his own personal vehicle without the aid of a deputy, and they end up shot. Mr. Moore is the lead person who calls for an investigation about what happened in that situation. And in him trying to get rid of Mr. Moore for all that he is in, because he's under investigation, who conspired along with him, but we'll never really know the whole plan because he kills himself after being questioned by the FBI. But what we do know is that on December 25th, 1951, as the family had celebrated Christmas at their mother's house, Mrs. Moore's mother's house, the Sims family, they come home and they celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. They have some cake, they do a little dancing. His mother speaks to him off to the side about continuing what she calls his work, right? And she says to him, you know, this is going to cause you to have a target on your back. You really need to stop. And he says something that's very apropos. He says, what is the price of freedom? And as we know, on that night, on December 25th, approximately 10:20 p.m., the bomb goes off. It is so loud that people as far as Scottsmore and Titusville actually come here. And then people think something has blown up at the NACA, which is where they were testing long-range missiles. And they had gathered all of these people here from every corner of the world, astrophysicists, rocket scientists, to try and get to outer space. So in these little cul-de-sacs, we had a lot of people who were writing home about what they had found about this great country, America. And so we have a cross-section between what's going on at NASA at that time and what's going on with the birth of the civil rights movement. And out of this, we get Mr. Moore and his wife actually being able to be the catalyst for all those grassroots efforts to galvanize behind the NAACP and get enough funding so that they can actually start these bus boycotts and the Brown versus the Board of Education, which starts the civil rights movement. So not only are we the birth of the space age, but we are the birth of the civil rights movement, and I just needed you to know that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karshonda Wright. And they do tours here like we do. They're so passionate about what they represent. And thank you for that. And we apologize for our people watching on our video podcast. We didn't work through our visual presentation here. But another thing like this is sort of a beta test for us all. But and again, we were kind of up against the pandemic, whether even this was going to happen or not. So we did cancel our January event, so to be on the safe side. So thank you very much. Please go through the museum here. Again, the great-grandson Darren is here. We're going to have him up and talk with a special announcement that is in the works here for the Moores. So, but let's get to our program here, and we have Art Edwards over here on the right. Art, give us a wave there. and Laura Poliah. Both have, Art has worked out at the Space Center. For the benefit of everybody here, I wanted to show a picture I'll have Art talk about. This is April 12th, 1981, Art. And this is the launch control room of the space shuttle, the first space shuttle. And there's one black man among the couple hundred engineers in there, and that's Art Edwards right there. And this is proudly on our console, as Art knows, up there, mostly because Bob Crippen signed it, but no. No, we love, and I point that out every time, just like Joanne Morgan, who was the first woman's engineer. She was the only woman in the Launch Control Center for Apollo 11 52 years ago, and she's also a great friend of our museum. So I'm going to open it up to Art to talk a few minutes about where he grew up, how he got in the space business, a few little highlights that he's proud of his career, and then we'll have Laura do the same, and then we'll open it up to some questions that I might ask them or you in the audience or on our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Spotify. And we'll say it's a great morning in Dundee, Scotland, there to our friend up there, Robert, and who else we have watching? Connie McDaniel, glad to see that you're watching us. She's a great volunteer.
Christopher Mick.
Yeah, Christopher Mick's watching in Wisconsin. Michigan is Dave Stang. Yeah, so anyway, so take it away, Art, there.
Okay. One second. Time out.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me today. What I like to do is kind of set the stage for my life and my career, and it'll probably help you to understand who I am. I was born and raised in Jackson County, Florida, Marianna, a small town up in northwest Florida. I was actually raised on my grandfather's farm. My grandfather's name is Arthur Edwards, but it's Arthur Ree Edwards. It's not, I'm not quite named after him. I had a cousin that was born in February. I was born in November, and my February cousin got his name, my grandfather's name. But at any rate, this cousin and I, we were both raised in the same house, just a few months apart. It was an extended family. My grandparents, my uncle and his family. And from time to time, we had other family members that needed a place to stay. And my grandfather had a fairly large house for that time. It was 3 bedrooms. But I don't know how we got everybody in that house, but we did somehow. And, you know, one of the things that my grandfather taught me, and just, that was one of them, was looking out for family and giving back. But my life hopefully has been modeled after my grandfather because he taught me a lot. I want you to kind of picture the farm. My grandfather owned 106 acres of land. When I say owned, he didn't owe anybody, he owned it. This land, the back of this land, there's a body of water that flows to the Apalachicola River. That water starts at a place that's called the Blue Springs, and it's flowing even today. It's a natural spring. So it's pretty valuable property. We still own that property. But one of the things that my grandfather taught me, first of all, was to accumulate things, to acquire things, but not to be a slave to the things that I acquired. And when I say taught me, he taught the children, the grandchildren, because my grandfather would get us, I was painting the picture. Here's the picture, 106 acre farm, one big white house near the front of the farm. That white house had 3 bedrooms, which for that time was unusual. Most of the houses were shotgun houses during that time. It had a formal living room. It had a kitchen and a dining room. And then it had, I guess, what you would call a multi-purpose room. It's where we did laundry. We had the pantry where we had canned goods and so on and so forth. So it was pretty good living. Did not have a bathroom though. My wife reminded me of that this morning. But we did have a 2-seater outside. At any rate, again, I'm painting the picture. On this farm, we had what's called a wood pile. And a wood pile is where you basically split wood for the fireplace and for the stove. And it normally has all kind of logs. And the wood pile was right next to the house. And next to the wood pile was the barn. Now, this barn, you've got to picture this. This barn was two stories. On one side of the barn, on the ground level, we'll say, for lack of a better word, on the left-hand side of the barn is where we parked the tractors, and we had all the tools we didn't want to be in the weather to rust and so on and so forth. On the right-hand side of the barn is where the animals went inside, the horses and the mules and those kinds of things. It was a big barn. In the middle of the barn, on the first floor, is where we had the grain. It was actually subdivided. In the front is where we had the grain, and in the back is where we had other things. It was kind of like a storage. Up top is where we, once we baled hay, is where we stored the hay. Now, the reason I mentioned the barn is because, again, follow me, leave the house, go to the wood pile. The wood pile is basically where my grandfather taught values. It was this place where he held court. And he always had time for the kids, and he taught us a lot of things at the wood pile. And we would sit around and listen to Grandpa. The barn is where the adults would go, kind of like that private place, if you will. They would talk, and they had conversations away from the kids and the women. And my wife reminded me they would also drink in the barn. And but we're not going to talk about that. But one of the things that, one of the things Mark and I had talked about is we talked about race. My grandfather was a man that was respected by all races. And I can remember different guys from town, white guys, business people, would come to the farm and they'd say, Arthur, let's go talk. And they would go to the barn and they would talk. Well, us kids, we had a little secret place to go from the ground level, from where the animals were, to the top level, and we could always listen to whatever the conversations were. And I was always amazed because, the conversations would just flow. And oftentimes these guys would be seeking my grandfather's advice. And so I grew up understanding that life is not sometimes what you think it is. The wood pile, one of the things I remember my grandfather told me, if you can't be a big oak on top of the hill, build a scrub pine in the bottom, but be the best blank scrub pine in the valley. And I remember that, and he taught us a lot of values. Now, growing up on a farm, there are things that you learn if you're going to be successful, and my grandfather was successful. You learn timeliness, you learn the quality of your work, you learn the importance of keeping your word, you learn how to schedule and how to execute the schedule, and a lot of what I call the soft skills in life. You learn those things. Now, one thing that the farm taught me that has also helped me is it taught me what I didn't want to be. I didn't know what I wanted to be growing up, but I knew what I didn't want to be, and that was a farmer. That's how I work. But, and Mike knows what I'm talking about. Mike McCulley knows exactly what I'm talking about. Farming is 24/7. The animals, they don't know it's Super Bowl Sunday. So it's hard work, but it's good work. And we more than managed. We had a good life. My grandfather, he got the local Chevrolet dealer's wife's car. She would trade up every 2 years and he would get her car. And so we always had a nice car. Food aplenty. And so life was pretty good on the farm. Early on, I started as a hobby, tinkering around with electronics. And I taught myself a lot about electronics. And so I decided I wanted to be a fix-it electronics guy. And when I went to Florida A&M University, My major was electronics. To be honest, I had never heard of an engineer, had no idea what an engineer was. But during my first year of college, I had to take some engineering classes. And the dean of engineering pulled me to the side and said, you don't need to be in electronics, you need to be in engineering. And, you know, I was 17 years old, I'm not gonna argue with the dean. So one Saturday, one week he said, on Saturday, I want everybody in this class to come to this building and you're gonna take a test. He wouldn't tell us what the test was. And so we went to Perry Page and we took a test. One of the hardest tests I ever took in my life. I had to take an aspirin when it was over. But it found out it was a civil service exam. And based on that civil service exam, the members of the engineering classes were placed different places. Some went to the Pentagon, some went to the Huntsville Marshall Space Center, and some came to the Kennedy Space Center. I was in the Kennedy Space Center group. Didn't know a lot about Kennedy Space Center, just have to be honest about it. Did not. You know, a lot of good things has happened in my life, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And I remember specifically when I arrived in Titusville on the bus, and this guy gave me a ride. And the bus station was down where the GMC dealership is now. And so I said, hey, I'm coming to work on the Space Center, you know, a hotshot college freshman. I'm going to be working at Kennedy Space Center. How long will it take me to walk to work? And this guy almost ran off the road. And he pointed across the river and he said, that's Kennedy Space Center. And I went, oh my God. But carpooling was a good thing. So I didn't have a problem getting to work. But again, you know, one generation off the farm. I was fortunate in that I got assigned to a location called the CIF antenna site. And at the CIF antenna site, we did things. I mean, we did engineering things. We did technician things. We had big dish antennas there that we had to service. We designed circuits, and I'm going to try and go faster because I got a lot to tell on my story. We designed circuits. Back in those days, you could go to the Central Supply and you could draw out anything you wanted, and they had everything. You know, transistors, resistors, capacitors, you name it, you could get it. And money was flowing back in those days. And so we experimented a lot. And I learned more as a co-op student, actually, than I learned that in college. Because I was working around engineers, I learned how to, as a freshman in college, I learned how to lay out a circuit board. I learned how to etch a circuit board. I learned how to drill and install components and how to bench test those components. I learned how to build a chassis as a student. I learned how to snake cables from the antenna site out to the dish antennas, how to go out and work on the servo motors. I learned all of that as a 18-year-old at this point in time. I was very fortunate. I had a boss, his name was Frank Byrne, and he was part of the original German team that came over to work on the space program. Frank Byrne was one of the smartest people I have ever known in my life. And Frank had this area set aside, and he was designing things, he was doing things. And I had no idea what he was working on, but what I found out later on is he was designing a part of what was to become the launch processing system for the space shuttle. He was designing the common data buffer. And the common data buffer is just where all the information flowed for the launch processing system. And we were part of that. And ironically, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but in my career, I became the director of the launch processing system, which I thought, you know, there's a certain irony in it. But getting back to the early days, when I finished school in 1970, I had an offer to go work for NASA, but I had many other offers as well. I had an offer from Rockwell Aviation at the time. Rockwell, this was on the Apollo program. Rockwell had the second stage of the Apollo vehicle, and they also had the command and service module where the astronauts, and I guess that's where Marty worked over in that area. I went to work on the S2, second stage. And the reason I went to work for Rockwell as opposed to NASA is because Rockwell showed me where I would be doing work, actually doing work. I was going to be on an engineering team with NASA. I didn't want to do that. And in less than a year, I had passed all of the stand boards, and I was working second shift for Rockwell as an S2 engineer, which I you know, growing up on a farm, you learn to work, and so I worked. You know, we talked about, you know, racial kinds of things, and you know, I reflect back on my life. Early on, I was part of a team that went and did college recruitment, and I'm pretty happy that a couple of people that came to work for Rockwell early on was part of my efforts back in the day, and some of those people they did extremely well. One was Sylvester Houston, who became the first black test conductor under United Space Alliance, and the other one was James Wilder, who ended up being a vice president with the United Space Alliance. He worked for Mike at one point in time, and when I say vice president, I mean second tier. You don't get much higher than that. But at any rate, I recruited a lot of engineers for the company. But you know, it's one thing to say, for me to say, you know, what happened to me, but I can point to other things as well. Rockwell used the National Management Association for training, and the National Management Association was just that. It had managers, it had supervisors, it had program managers, all a part of that. And they had elected positions. I joined the NMA because I wanted to be trained. I wanted to learn some things. And in 1978, I was 30 years old. I became the youngest president elected to the Rockwell National Management Association. I had been encouraged by the manager of finance to run for the vice president position, never thinking I would get it, but I did. And then I ran for the president, and I became the president of the association. So, you know, when you start thinking about again about racial kinds of things, one of the things that my grandfather told me was not to have limits, but he also talked about preparation and opportunity. And he talked about how one without the other, it doesn't get you very much. But when you're prepared and when the opportunity comes along, that's when good things happen for you. So that's kind of been one of the mantras of my life, is trying to be ready when the opportunity came along. But I had a great career. Transitioned from the Apollo program to the Shuttle Program. I was one of about, the original engineering team was about 25 people, I guess, initially. And I had a subsystem, and part of that subsystem was a thing that was called a remote manipulator system, RMS. It wasn't going to fly on the first flight, so people weren't paying a lot of attention to it. But I learned that I needed to pay a lot of attention to it. We were trying to get off the ground, you know, with the first flight. But I had the good fortune of working with the NASA guy, and his name was Don Conover. And again, Don is a smart cookie. I mean, a very, very smart cookie. And I was fortunate that Don and I were more than just contractor NASA. We were friends. I mean, we had a close relationship. And we would go to Canada, where the arm was being developed. We would work with the Canadians. We would go to Houston to check out our software. We knew a lot of the astronauts. We had phone numbers for a lot of the astronauts because the RMS was kind of, it had to be used on the second flight. But the astronauts, they had a really, really high interest in it. And so they would give us, they give us our phone numbers and say, hey, when the test is going to happen, give us a call. And they had these little planes that they would fly back and forth. So they could be here almost on a moment's notice. There were times when Don and I, we would be testing the RMS, And Don had a motorhome, and he would bring his motorhome out to the OPF, and we would work, and then we'd go to sleep, and we'd get up and work some more. The rules are different now. You couldn't do that now, but that's the way we did it. And the first arm was successfully installed, and it operated flawlessly on the second mission of the space shuttle. Now, Mark mentioned the. How am I doing on time?
Good. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're enjoying Art Edwards here, and we'll second. But yeah, well, I'm always fascinated by the remote manipulator arm that Art was involved in. Yeah. A lot of us are interested in the remote manipulator arm that you worked on there, such a vital thing to deploy and build the space station and so forth. So, being a black man in Canada, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, going to Toronto, Canada, was a great experience. First of all, I hadn't been around snow, and so I had to have a different wardrobe for going to Canada. But Toronto was an interesting city. It's the first city that you didn't hear horns, and I guess they had some laws about that. But it was a big city, but it was not a typical big city. Going to Canada, the engineering experience was great, but the interfacing with the people was even greater. We developed a really good relationship with the Canadians that were building the arm, and so we were able to do our job a whole lot more effectively because we did have that great relationship, and we learned a lot from those guys. But it was good.
Molson beer, that kind of stuff up there. Just teasing you there,
No.
Art. But anyway, we'll come back to Art Edwards here in a minute. We want to thank Sharon McDougal's watching. Remember Sharon, Mike McCulley, Suit Tech at Houston. We did an excellent Stay Curious episode with her that you can check on our video library on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Spotify. We also got Ophelia's watching in France. Hello, Kenneth Otto. Kenneth Otto says, thank you for the history lesson there, Karshanda. And we've got Ashley Kendrick is in Tennessee. That's my grandbaby's grandma, or Mimo, I guess. We've got the Usiak brothers watching from Pennsylvania, and David Leon. So we wanted to give a shout out to everybody there. And where I'm not going to give Laura Poliah here is like going, what did I get myself into? I could be playing tennis this morning or something. Just teasing you there, but I wanted this is one of our rising stars in the Artemis program, no doubt. Thank you, the Moore Center, for reaching out to get her, Sonia, there, and we certainly want you to share your story on our Stay Curious program. But Laura is a first-generation college student graduating from the University of Central Florida in 2012 with degrees in aerospace and mechanical engineering. She has been a distinguished engineer on Orion Space Launch System and the ground system since 2011. So she hardly looks that old to be involved 10 years. Up-to-date stuff about that, but she's involved in several leadership programs, including the development chair for the local Society of Women Engineers. So, Laura, thank you for being here, and tell us a little bit about how you grew up and what turned you on to space engineering.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it. I always think it's really important to come out and talk to the world about how people got to where they are and really enlighten everyone that it's not difficult, it's just a path that you have to take and commit to. So how I started off, my parents are first generation immigrants coming from Trinidad and Tobago. They came to New York, and that's where I was born. And when I was 8, I moved to Florida, so I'm really a Floridian. And just in terms of just the ethics that my parents taught me, being immigrants from another country. They had a very hard work ethic. They came here not knowing anybody besides a couple of family members, and just trying to establish something for their children. And like art, I didn't even know about engineering. If you would have came to me when I was 8 and said that you're going to be working at NASA on a space program leading up, the Orion spacecraft is going to take astronauts to the moon and to Mars, I would have thought you were joking. And that's part of one of the obstacles I had to overcome when I was growing up, was that because my parents were immigrants, and because they didn't know about all the opportunities, I wasn't aware of all the opportunities. So as me and my sisters, I have 2 older sisters, grew up, we had to make sure that we were always striving to learn more, to get more knowledge and get more experience as we were going through things in our life. And one of the things they instilled was, be good at math, be good at science. We want you to have a well-paying job, because we were lower income when they came to New York and when they came to Florida. So one of the things they wanted for us, and what we wanted for ourselves, was never to kind of be in a situation where you had to struggle for money or where you had to struggle for things. They wanted to set us up for success. And so was always working to strive for that. And my father, he worked 3 jobs, and my mom worked 2 jobs. And so it was always something, that's what they instilled to us, is work hard, focus on what you can do, and then that's how you're going to make your path in the world. And so that's what I did. Basically, when I was going to school, that's what I focused on, was making sure that I was doing good in school. And it wasn't until 7th grade, again, I wasn't really into science, didn't know anything about engineering. And in 7th grade, I did love to read. And I was at the library almost every weekend, and there was a book on the floor. And someone didn't put it away. I thought that was pretty rude, so I went to go pick it up and put it away. And so when I picked it up, it was a book about astrophysics. And I was intrigued. I opened it up. I read a section in there in where it essentially was talking about how you can determine if a solar system, has other planets in there, and how you can determine if it has planets in that solar system and how many planets it might have. And to that day, that's what sparked my interest in space. I thought it was so interesting that you could be able to determine something from being here on Earth for something millions of miles away. And I put that in the back of my mind. I still didn't think about it. In my mind, I was still going for accounting or some sort of medical degree, and I still did good in school, and I was prepared. Like Art was saying, is that opportunity and being prepared is really what it comes from. And so I went into college. You're at your orientation, and they said, well, it's time to pick a degree. I was at UCF, and there it came out in the back of my head again, and where it's, oh, well, astrophysics was pretty interesting. Maybe I'll try that. Unfortunately, at the time, they didn't have it. And so there was either you go into physics or you go into aerospace engineering. I figured, oh, what's the difference? There is a big difference. But I went for aerospace engineering, and that's what started my path to where I was. Again, I really didn't know what engineering really meant until I started into those classes. And I won't lie, it was difficult because I didn't know what engineering was. I didn't really know, whereas other people in my classes already mostly knew what it was, or they had the abilities taught into them at an earlier age. And so part of that is, as you're growing up, men have toys like Legos or programming or video games. And typically when I was growing up, that we had other types of toys to play with. And part of research shows that when you play with Legos, when you play with programming or play with video games, that helps you set yourself up for engineering type jobs. And so that was something I was lacking in going into engineering. And so it was an interesting aspect that I had to work through and work hard with, and try to figure out how can I overcome this with that those setbacks that I had associated with it. And then so when I was going through aerospace, I told my mom, I came home and I was like, well, I think I'm going to do aerospace engineering. She laughed it off because she didn't really know what it was. And she's like, oh, you're going to take me to the moon. I said, well, I'll take somebody to the moon, I hope. And so with that, there was a lot of people who would tell me, like in my family, because they didn't really know what it was. They were just like, well, why are you going to school for that? Go for accounting or go for medical. And even in school, I had to take extra classes because I didn't know about prerequisites at the time because we were first generation going to college. So didn't know that there were certain classes you had to take before going into other classes. So I was already at a setback from that perspective as well. So I was taking 6 classes. I didn't want to go into debt because, again, I didn't want to have any financial issues. So I was working 3 jobs. I was going to school, and I said, okay, be dedicated, be focused. I can only do what I can do. And that's where I started to progress into being more involved at school and more programs and more trying to go for internships. And again, they weren't really space related. They were more mechanical jobs that were available. So I started looking into what opportunities there were. At the time when I was looking to graduate from aerospace engineering, there just wasn't a lot of opportunities. So I decided to go back for mechanical engineering. And when I was in mechanical engineering, as part of my networking that I was trying to do, I met someone that said, hey, this job at the Space Center is open. It's a contractor, but you might be interested. And so I interviewed the next day for it, got the job. And part of that was that it was the very next day. He told me about it maybe at 10 p.m. at night, and he said the interview would be at 7 a.m. in the morning. So I was ready. I emailed her my resume, got up early in the morning. I was ready for the interview. And then the next day after, that was the interview with the contractor, and the next day I interviewed with my NASA counterparts. And then I got the job from it. And then the next week I was working at NASA. And that was, it was surreal when I first walked into there. And I started off as system engineering. I was doing interfaces with the design of the Artemis mission. So there's the Space Launch System rocket, which is SLS, and it's our Marshall team that's working that. And then there's the Orion spacecraft, which is out at Johnson. It's really all over. We work with the Europeans and we work with people all over, but Johnson is kind of where we're mostly located. And then there's the ground systems here where everything comes together, gets integrated, and launches off of. So I was working the interfaces between all of that. And the opportunity I got there was I had a really good support, team that I was working with. My supervisor was an amazing mentor. He was trying to set me up for success because he knew I was right out of college. So he wanted to make sure that when I was doing things that he would, be critical, but also be telling me how to improve myself, which I think was really important. And then also I had a lead that knew that I was competent, that I was focused and driven, and I knew the material I was talking about. So he usually would let me step back and let me take on more leadership roles, more different types of roles, and be able to show and immerse myself. And one of the things at the Space Center is that everyone's working towards a mission. So as long as you're working towards that mission and you're working hard and you're passionate, you don't really feel a disconnect with anybody. You're all working towards something. So it's not like you feel adversity. It's more of that diversity and inclusion that you have at the Space Center. And so from there, I wanted something a little bit more hands-on. At the time, it was more theoretical because there was no hardware there. We were all doing the designs, and so we moved towards I wanted to move towards the actual hardware. So that's when I moved towards the Orion spacecraft as it was getting built. And from there, because I was very passionate about what I was doing, and I was very focused on what I was doing. I was able to ingrain myself into everything, all the aspects of testing, and so we get to follow it as it's getting assembled and put together, tested, making sure it's qualified to go into space. And then I've been able to follow this Artemis 1 mission all the way up until where it's integrated on the SLS, and we're doing integrated testing, and we're about to roll out to the pad. So it's just a lot of good opportunities that have arisen, but also I was like Art was saying, prepared, in the sense that I can't change the world, but I could change how I act and react to it. And all I could do is make sure I'm focused and I'm prepared. And when those opportunities arise, you go for them. So that's kind of how I got
Laura,
into
that's quite a story. Well, quite a story, Laura. A library book on the ground, on the floor.
Yeah.
Sent you on astrometrics, it was, you said?
Astrophysics.
Oh, astrophysics, yeah, astrophysics.
Which I
Well,
don't like physics.
Yeah, I think that's 629 in the Dewey Decimal System. I'm very familiar with the astronomy part of the Dewey. But what an outstanding story. What an inspiration, we hope, to many of you out there. We'll have a little back and forth here. Art, what do you think of this young lady here and what she's doing?
I think she's amazing. I think she's simply amazing. But we have one issue, physics. My BS is actually in physics.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
so
My BS is in public speaking.
no, seriously. When she talks about how hard it is, I understand that. It is hard. But the reason that I majored in physics is because when I was working at the CF antenna site, there were engineers there, electrical engineers, and there were guys that had physics degrees. They were all smart. The engineers understood how things worked, but the physics guys understood how they worked, and then they understood why they worked the way that they worked. And so that kind of piqued my interest into physics. But other than that, we cool.
Yeah. Laura Poliah was on a wonderful, about a 4-minute segment on the Today Show. How long ago was that?
Well, it aired in February.
Okay. I'm going to put that up on our Facebook page. She joined Charlie Blackwell Thompson, the first launch director, astronaut Stephanie Wilson, who's on the Artemis program. And who is the other lady on there with you?
Yeah, Deborah, but I don't remember her last name.
Okay.
She's from SLS. She's the one of the management levels at the SLS.
This was a big
program.
deal on the Today Show because they cut away to the break and they're all chit-chatting about how inspirational you women were and hoping some woman's out there having her little girls having her cereal and would be inspired to do this. So what was that experience like? Your moment of fame there on the Today Show.
So it didn't when we were doing it because it wasn't live. So we recorded it in December. So when we recorded it, it didn't really hit me as much as it was nice being on a panel. I felt I didn't. There's a lot of time they call it Imposter Syndrome, and where you don't really feel like you belong in a certain area. So like I'm next to the first female launch director, management level from SLS and Astronaut, and then there's me. And so it felt surreal being there at the time. So recording it just, that's how it felt at the time. I was inspired by the women next to me. So when it came out though, and you got to see it from the integrated aspect of the videos that they showed and then afterwards, it was, I don't know, there's a lot of pride in how I felt. And also, I felt just, I don't really know how to explain it, but just like my family, my whole entire family was behind it. They were just like, we are so proud of you. We can't believe that this is where you got to. And yeah, they were very pointed on that, and then a lot of them were saying, you completely inspired our children.
Also, you're married. Do you have children of your own?
I have 2 cats and a dog.
Okay, all right. Is your-
It
is your
does
hu-
count. They're my fur babies.
Tell us your husband's name. We don't
My
want him to be
husband,
mad.
Anthony Mance, goes by Tony. He also works out at the Space Center. He's phenomenal. He does a lot of the range safety aspect of what's going on. So we're putting stuff in space, and he's making sure it doesn't come back and harm you.
Well, good. You're working on Orion, and he's on range safety. So the question that we all have is, when? When are we going to pull it out there to the pad for the test, and then when do you think the launch will happen?
Yeah,
And tell us about that launch that you're planning. A lot of people don't understand what the uncrewed Orion's going to do.
Yeah, so right now we're finishing up our last touches in the VAB, which is the assembly building that we assemble the vehicle. It has the SLS on there. There's a mobile launcher, the SLS, the Orion spacecraft, all integrated at the moment. And now we're just essentially doing closeouts of it, making sure that it's protected from the weather when we roll out to the pad. So we should be finishing up all the rollouts and being able to go out there in the March timeframe. Then we're going to be doing a wet dress rehearsal, which is going to be essentially where we're simulating the launch, and we're really going through a lot of the dynamics for the first time, and just making sure there's no major hitches. And then once we come back from the pad, we'll go back to the vehicle assembly building, and then we'll work on all the the final closeouts, the pyros, and making sure that all our ordnance is working okay. And then once we wrap up from there, in the April-May timeframe should be when we're going out for the actual launch itself, which will be very exciting. And this is our Artemis 1 mission. So you got to go on the Shuttle 1 mission. And so we'll be doing the Artemis 1 mission, which is very exciting. And once we launch, it'll be the Orion spacecraft that is going to basically go into the trajectory to orbit around the moon, again uncrewed, because this is going to be it's our test flight, orbit around the moon and then come back. And it's going to launch and we'll recover it in San Diego and transport it back here. And then on the Artemis 2 mission, that's where we'll have very similar trajectory and orbit, but that one will be crewed. And so that's what we're going to continue to work with, and every mission after that will be another stepping stone for getting us to the for landing on the moon, and then eventually getting us to Mars.
And that sounds exciting. Now, for those of you who don't know, over here in Titusville, the big bridge, the Max Brewer Bridge, if you look to the south of that, which is towards Miami, don't look towards Jacksonville, Miami, and you see the first blinking towers up there. Marsport. And in fact, the moon was rising right over it last night, late in the evening. It was a gorgeous sight up there. So that's so exciting. And yes, you and Art contrasting here. He was involved with the STS-1, and you're on Artemis 1 there. How many? Now, I picked up from the Today Show program. There's about 30% of the management at NASA is female in there. Give an idea how many thousands of people are working on Artemis.
No, I
Sure,
can't.
is that-
I wouldn't know for
Oh,
sure
okay.
exactly.
It's not as big as the Apollo era program there, but
Yeah, but I will say, for the Artemis mission, we are in almost every state of this country have someone working on the Artemis mission, from our vendors to our test facilities to where we integrate. And then we work with our European Space Agency. So there are multiple countries in Europe that we work with. So this whole Artemis mission is bringing in people from all over the world for this one mission and to get us into space and back on the moon.
do you do much travel yourself?
I do. Less with COVID. But a lot of our testing was over in Denver, where there's a Lockheed Martin facility there. And then Ohio, where it was called Plum Brook, now it's called the Armstrong Test Facility. We did a lot of our thermal vacuum testing there.
Up on
And
Lake Erie. Different
Yeah,
set of clothes when you go up there in the wintertime.
actually, the first time I ever drove in snow was to go to Sandusky, Ohio, and it was nerve-wracking. It was January. It was my very first test I ever went for, period. 2016 was the first test I went for the Orion spacecraft. And I had to go through that, and I was scared. I was just tense the whole
That's interesting. Well, we appreciate everybody watching our diversity program, a great partnership with the Moore Center and into a partnership with these two facilities that, like we said, celebrate the birth of the space age and the birth of the civil rights movement. Anybody have, I'm inspired here. We got two other things real quick. Anybody have any questions in the audience there? Yes, sir, Mr. Mark. What's been your most challenging part of your job, Marty? Charlie Mars has asked.
So believe it or not, it's communication. We, like I was mentioning, we work with people from all over the world, and we work on issues on the spacecrafts. And so I'm here in this facility, in the facility at KSC. An issue happens with the vehicle. It's being able to communicate concisely and quickly what the issue is to someone that might still be in Europe, or a lot of our system experts are in Houston or in Denver, and it's communicating with them quickly and concisely what the issue is, where I'm talking about in the vehicle, and getting them to work through quickly what the issue is. And so probably one of the most difficult situations is when we were first starting to work with the European Space Agency. There's obviously a translation in when you're talking, and we were working with people that wasn't only in my control area, but a control area in a different floor. And so it was trying to have all of that discussion happen at the same time, and then also having to deal with that translation barrier. And there, at first we were bumping heads and raising voices, and it was just understanding that was a crucial conversation, and how to get past that and work through those issues. So we got better over time, but when we first started off, that was probably the most difficult.
Charlie, if you remember at the beginning of the Space Shuttle Program, engineers did everything. We had to develop training on our systems. Knew nothing about avionics, absolutely nothing about avionics. And I had to teach parts of my system. I had the one part of the DPS system, the onboard computers, the flight instruments, those kinds of things, and the RMS. But I was kind of over my head. And what I did is I started going to UCF at night after work and going to the library and studying. And so I almost had to go back and educate myself on avionics so I could teach, because we had to teach engineers, we had to teach technicians. The engineers taught the classes, and we had to develop the classes. And they taught us how to do, it was called GO, Ground Operations Aerospace Language. They taught us how to do programming, but it was on a rudimentary level. We didn't have any idea about the complexities of programming. So that was my biggest challenge, was making that leap from being very successful on Apollo, but that's relays, simple stuff, to the more complex stuff of the space shuttle.
Interesting. And of course, you're pioneering new things that haven't been done before.
Yes.
In space, and so that's even more an unknown, right?
Yes.
In there.
Well, if you go back to the RMS was a very complex piece of equipment, and
remote manipulator system.
Manipulator system.
Acronym NASA people.
It's another language out there.
Good. Well, Our diversity program here wouldn't be, we've got a special guest that said he was coming up here, Mike McCulley. I'm going to move Mike between you two here, Laura.
Okay.
Spread down there a little bit. As we head this, thank you, Mr. McCulley. Mike McCulley was the pilot of Space Transportation System number 34 that deployed the Galileo spacecraft. That doesn't mean he owns any. That doesn't mean he knows anything about Jupiter like us, including Chief Operating Officer, right? Mike, we're so glad you came here to support Art Edwards. All right, and tell us a little bit about our little diversity panel here, and add to it what you can, please, sir.
A little background then, and thank you, Art, for bringing me. But
Hold that closer.
I grew up in a small town in Tennessee. It was in the Jim Crow years, and if you don't know who Jim Crow was, you ought to go figure it out. Yeah, but the town I grew up in, I grew up without ever seeing hatred or anything even approaching hatred. I saw discrimination. I had a paper route when I was 13, and the town was divided into 4 quadrants. And I had the paper route in the quadrant that we're talking about today. And so I made these friends, kids my own age, who every morning got on a bus and went 30 miles to go to school. And I walked 100 yards to go to school. I worked in a drugstore, and the black community would come to the back door to buy something. They didn't come in the front door. But I never saw hatred. I saw discrimination, but not hatred. So I probably wasn't very disturbed about it. My best friend since 1965, who I talked to this morning, is a black guy who grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. He grew up in a totally different world, and I was only about 100 miles north of him. And Jim Crow world where he grew up in Alabama was different than Jim Crow world where I was. But we met each other in the Navy, and we were young and rambunctious, and we traveled together. We did stuff together. We would occasionally go into communities where I had no business being, or go into communities where he had no business being, and dare anybody to mess with us. That's how stupid we were in those days. But we've laughed about that over the years. But the Navy certainly has had, like all the military services over the years, discriminatory products and people. But for he and I, we've been bonded for 50 years now, or whatever it is, going back to 65, very closely bonded. And we've largely ignored the fact that, you don't ignore the fact that I'm white and he's black, but we've ignored any sort of, we never have dealt with it, other than we're just close friends, very close friends. We flew together in A6 intruders, and which was a very bonding experience. We saved each other's life a couple of times, which was very bonding. In fact, back a few years ago, NASA was catching a lot of heat when Dan Golden was the administrator, because NASA wasn't doing a very good job on equality and discrimination and bosses and things like that. So I get this call from a very senior guy who knew about Henry and I, and he called and he said, "Where's your friend Henry?" And I laughed. I said, "You're recruiting, aren't you?" Because Congress was all over NASA about the number of blacks in the leadership ranks. So I said, "I'm not going to give you his information, but I'll call him." He was working for Corning Glass at that time, and he was in Japan. So I tracked him down in Japan, and I said, "Henry, I'm going to pass this offer on, but I'm not going to recommend it either way." Simply because they were going to hire him because he was black, not because he was an engineer out of Purdue like I was, who was brilliant, and he was chosen by Corning to go move this plant from New York to Japan because of his skills and his talents. But I knew that NASA wanted to hire him because Congress was on NASA because they didn't have enough black guys and gals in the SES service. Well, long story short, he took the offer, came down to Houston, and so we were back together again. And but we've been very, very close, especially considering that, again, he grew up in black Alabama and I grew up in white Tennessee. And while we don't spend much time talking about it, we just know each other. And we know we've toured the world on motorcycles. And we took a 2-week, 5,000-mile trip one time together, and it was really funny because sometimes it's interesting how people look at you. Two guys get off of a motorcycle at a restaurant. One's black and the other one's white, and we're laughing. And, you know, the way he tells me he loves me is to yell at me, and vice versa. His children, not just possible, but fun to us to do that. And they've been affected by it, and they've told us that. So you mentioned Jim Wilder a minute ago. Jim Wilder was running the depot down in Cape Canaveral. And I had an opening. This is when I became the CEO, and I had an opening out in Houston for a very important job, running the Orbiter project, and Wilder was my guy. So I go to Jim, and I said, I need you to move to Houston. What? He said. Why would I want to go to Houston? Well, I convinced him. I said, I need you in Houston. And what had triggered me for that, and this goes back to some of my management and leadership things, but I had a job out in Houston, moving a manager up to a director. It was a very good job, a very important job. And when I looked at the candidates, there were about a half a dozen candidates, 2 of which were black men. So when we posted the job, neither one of those guys applied. So I went to them, and I took Wilder with me. And I said, I need to understand why you're not applying for the job. And their answer was they thought they didn't have a chance because they were black. As simple as that, which was wrong. I knew who the selection board was going to be. I knew what I wanted to do. And so one of them decided not to apply. The other one did apply, and he got the job. And I was stunned, although I shouldn't have been in retrospect, but I was stunned that in the company, which we thought was following all the rules and had the right attitude, but those 2 guys weren't going to apply for a job because they thought they didn't have a chance because they were black. And whether that was true or not true, it was just, again, by this time I'm 65 years old. I've been around. I've done a lot of stuff. And I was stunned by that answer. Anyway, we promoted one of them. Now, the next thing that happened about that same time, but this time I was the program manager for the shuttle in Houston. And my secretary got a promotion and was moving to another spot. So we posted, the HR just went through the normal posting and posted for the job. And there were 4 or 5 really strong candidates from around the USA down here, USA in Huntsville, and USA out in Houston. And so I think I interviewed 3 or 4, can't remember for sure. And one of them was a black lady from the depot here who did not know me or any of my history. And I selected a lady, and it wasn't her. But the blackness of the situation had absolutely nothing to do why I chose this particular one. So the next thing she does is go to find a lawyer in Titusville and was suing the company and me as a selecting official for discrimination in hiring. And it was only because guys like Wilder and him and others who knew how I thought. And I'm not a flag waving whatever it is, and I'm not, and these guys know how I work, and it's generally quietly and effectively, and I go behind the lines. And so the lawyer who she got, fortunately knew me, and he knew what some of my habits were and what my patterns were and what my race record was, and told her she ought to think twice about doing that because she didn't have a chance of winning it. So I've seen this stuff for 65 years or so now, or 70. I'm almost 80 actually, from both sides of it, and it's disturbing to me as much today. And the reason I'm happy to be here as your guest, because there's not enough. I don't know what the right word is, humanity maybe or something, and then we watch TV, and we see these things that are just friggin' ugly between blacks and whites. And these three guys down in Georgia that killed a kid who was jogging, I hope those son of bitches rot in hell, and I think they're going to, because first of all, their emails, everything else, they're so damn guilty you can't even stand it. But it's just horrible that we have to deal with that. End of speech.
Mike McCulley,
By the
former
way-
astronaut and important manager for the shuttle era.
And the best part about it today was the history lesson.
Yeah,
I loved that. Absolutely loved it.
yeah.
Thank you all.
This is quite. Thank you, Mike, for willing to share that. Laura, you got anything to ask Mr. McCulley, or anything come to mind? Art, did you want to ask? Good friend there. Okay.
No, I would like to talk about him if I can.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, as long as he blushes.
It's I'm in the process of writing a book about African Americans at the spaceport, and I've been a contributing author rather on a book, and one of the chapters, this is a simulation of the book I'm writing, but one of the chapters in the book is about a lady named Eunice Allen, and Eunice Allen. Okay, well, I won't go into it, Mike, because I know how you felt about Eunice. Eunice lived about 3 miles from here, over by the airport. She's my wife's godmother. And I remember Eunice, well, we went to the same church. And Eunice used to, during the summer, would bring this little white girl to church and take up in the choir stand. And I guess she'd stay with Eunice all summer long. When Eunice passed away, this lady now at her funeral was talking about Eunice and what Eunice meant to her. Well, this lady was Mike's daughter, and Mike came all the way from Houston to do the eulogy for Eunice. The president of the United Space Alliance, it's okay, Mike. The president of United Space Alliance, you know, not some little local Joe, but I mean, he was the man at the top. And so that says who Mike McCulley is. But Eunice used to babysit his kids, and he would go to Europe or wherever he would go, him and Jane. And they trusted her to keep the kids for the summer or whatever. And I was talking to her daughter a couple of days ago, and Mike had a car, a little Honda to somebody. I don't want to sell it because I won't get a good price. I just want to give it to somebody that's in need of an automobile. And I said, well, Mike, I've got a daughter who's trying to be self-sufficient, and she needs a car. And so Mike gave her a Honda, a car, nice car. And I was talking to Eunice's daughter. Can I keep talking, Mike? Okay. I was talking to Eunice's daughter, and she said, well, Mike gave Mama a car, gave her a Toyota. But he's one of the most decent human beings I've ever been around. And there's a couple other guys in the audience. You know, Charlie Murphy sitting there was one of my bosses at one point in time. And the first thing Charlie asked me today was if Audrey was coming, my wife. I mean, he knows us like that, you know, and said he was looking forward to seeing her and blah, 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 blah. And then there's Charlie Mars. Charlie was NASA. And Charlie was one of the craziest bosses I've ever been around.
We know, yeah.
Charlie
Our
had this
Godfather.
stick. He had this stick he used to walk around with.
Oh, really?
And he had to bang on the table. And I mean, he did
His
stuff
big
that
cowboy hat on.
You remember that stick, Charlie?
Uh,
But he did stuff that was a little off kilter. but the thing I found, I'm sorry. It absolutely worked. the thing that I found out about all these guys were fair. And if you did the job, you know, they gave you the opportunity to do the job.
That's good.
And that's all you can ask for. I mean, that's what equal opportunity is about.
You can't talk about Mike McCulley. I've heard him talk several times. He says, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I got the job I wanted, but I also got the girl I wanted. And his wife, Jane, is a true partner in your life, I know, with all the things you were saying there, Art. But Mike, you do so much, so humbly for many organizations, and we appreciate you joining us so impromptu here today. Appreciate that. That was very special. We want to thank also one of our supporters at the museum financially, the Marie Louise G. West Endowment, that gave us an endowment money to buy all this stuff to take our program to the next level with our Trekkie Techie Jessica Galloway. And wanted to again mention Marty Winkle doing the camera work, a veteran of the moon race, as well as a launch process service computer engineer. I really know Darren Pagan, as I said, and so I'll have you tell us a little bit about yourself quickly, and well, where you from? Where you grew up?
Sure. So I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. Grown up there my whole life, but obviously my family was based here. And it truly is an honor to be with each of you celebrating diversity in space, particularly the impacts that each of these tremendous individuals made. You know, I was laughing and joking with Sonia that I've known Mr. Edwards for a long time. This is a history lesson for me also. And again, I think the one thing that unites both what you're doing and also the Cultural Center is, you know, just this theme of people paving the path before you and the impacts that they've made that ultimately did.
Thank you. We're so honored to have you. What kind of career do you have, Darren?
Sure. So I'm in finance, so not smart enough quite to be in the physics realm, but I'm enjoying a career in finance working for Deloitte as a consultant there.
So what does this all mean to you? Your parents were grandparents of the Moores, correct? So has this been part of your life that you've heard about since you were?
Absolutely. It's always been a part of my life and the legacy that I try to carry forward. You know, the one thing that I really was able to get in terms of knowledge from my grandmother and then also larger family members was just the impact that they had in so many realms of life, particularly as we continue to fight for equality in many other areas. So, I really was enjoying just hearing the contributions that each of you made. And ultimately how that's shaped, you know, space exploration and the opportunity that people of color have had because of, you know, the contributions of the three of you. So
Thank you. And we've got kind of a news breaking item that the Moore Center, I'll have Darren explain what they want to happen to honor Harry T. and Harriette V. Moore. Tell us a little about what we hope will happen there,
Absolutely.
Darren.
So I'm holding the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nomination, which we are hoping to receive. So that has been a big news item for us, obviously, in the month of February. And it couldn't be more timely considering that it is Black History Month. So huge thank you to Congressman Charlie Crist for the nomination. And again, fingers crossed that we will receive that. And it would also be great to receive it by the end of February, considering the timeliness.
That's good. That's good. So this is in front of the the Biden administration to honor this couple with the nation's highest award,
Absolutely.
the Medal of Freedom, and certainly deserved. And Marty's going to zoom into that. The congressman is Charlie Crist.
Yep.
Okay, here. How'd this come about? Did you have anything to do with it, or is this Sonia and Karshanda over there and the board?
This was a shock to all of us.
Right up there, close.
Oh, sorry. It was a shock to all of us. It is an honor. Charlie, Congressman Crist has been someone that has been incredibly influential and very involved with not only the story, but with my grandmother. And, as she continued to progress and really make sure that the story was more well known, he was someone that followed her the entire way. So it couldn't be from a better man. And it is incredibly meaningful, not only the honor, but that it came from him.
Yeah. Well, all of you out there enjoying our program of diversity today know this is a slam dunk that they should be able to do this for the Moors here, and that'll be we look forward to hearing from that from the staff here. Thank you, Darren. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our social media audience and the group here today?
No, again, it was a tremendous honor just to experience the beginning of a partnership, hopefully, as we continue this progression in diversity and space exploration. So I hope to continue following and seeing the great work that you are doing.
Good. Well, we hope to see you again when we do this again, maybe next year. So thank you very much, Darren Pagan, great-grandson of the Moors. Very good there. So do we have any pressing questions out there? I know that Sharon McDougall says good to see Art and Mike again there. And she sends Mike some tissues, too, by the way. And there we got W. Tom Jefferson's been watching, Sam Berlanda, Kathleen Slade. Literally people all over the world enjoying this special Stay Curious program where we celebrate diversity with the Moore Cultural Center and Museum just 4 miles from the American Space Museum. So is there any parting? Yeah, we have in our audience here Sandy Storm. See Sandy. And she has a question of our panel.
I was asked by Clarence Moore and some other and some other people to design to compete for the Harry Moore Memorial. And to make it short, as I was selected, and it's quite an honor to do both of these, the Apollo, and to bring these two together was a wonderful surprise to me. It's not about me, but it's about these guys. Yeah. But Harry T. Moore's daughter, I was working with her on the Justice Center, Harry T. Moore sculpture, and they wanted children in there, and she asked me if I would do a couple of, since they were teachers, we were going to do 2 small children holding books, and part of that was my idea. And she gave me a picture of of her grandson.
That was me, yes.
That was you.
It was.
It looked like him, and all she had was a photograph from the front. And I thought, how am I going to get the profile reaching up like that? I sculpted a whole sculpture, 3-dimensional sculpture, turned it sideways, and used that to do the little boy in the picture. And in the play, look at it later. And was that you?
It was me. And
That was,
I got to see it.
I'm so glad to meet you.
It's an honor to meet you, Ross.
As I walked in.
Yeah, no, it was me. I did get to see it shortly, in person, actually, shortly after it was completed. So, it's kind of funny to see. I've gotten a little older, I'll say, but it was really nice to not only personally be able to be involved in the work that you did and kind of the continued legacy. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, the Justice Center in Viera, that's sort of the county seat area, honors the Moors, as does a senior facility in downtown Titusville. Are there any other memorials to them in the county? And of course, this wonderful. Okay, Highway 46 is named after the Moors there. Okay. Why don't you ladies come up here with me here while we take us out of our program here. Get Sonia and Carsonda up here to help us. Laura, is there anything you'd like to comment and say as we conclude our little program on diversity today?
No.
Sitting next to an astronaut there. Of course, you're probably used to
I
that.
have the mic.
Yeah, she's back.
I would just end it in where, where I'd like to see, where I do see the future of where we're going in the space industry and it just in the world is there are going to be more people of color and people of gender and in management, in leadership as workers everywhere. And and I hope to see and where it's not something that has to then be newsworthy. It's just something that happens, and it's not something we have to talk about. It's just a normal everyday discussion. But that is where I see that we're going, and we are progressing. If you hear from Art and Mike here, like, when they first started off, a lot of the conversations that are going, and then it comes to me, and a lot of what I felt at the workplace has, always been in the positive note. So I do feel like we're getting there, and just more conversations like this will just help.
Well, thank you, Laura. Laura Poliah, one of our rising stars.
We appreciate you being here today. Mr. Art Edwards, thank you for your friendship and all you do. To say something?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to say thanks for this program. Appreciate the opportunity. And I want to talk about the future. Hopefully we're going to do some things down at the museum that will excite African American students, youth, if you will, and get them involved in STEM areas. I've got my son, he's an engineer, but he didn't go to work at Kennedy Space Center. I've got a nephew that just got his master's in physics from FIT, and he just hired on at Kennedy Space Center. So I'm looking for some generational kinds of things, but in science, science kinds of things. Because if we're going to not just survive, but thrive, as a country, we're going to have to involve more people. And we're going to have to tap the minds of people that's capable, the youth that are capable, but don't have the opportunity. So, I just say for all of us, for people that are listening in, is let's not forget the youth. Let's bring them along. I've had my time, and we got to make sure we keep the ball rolling.
Thank you, Art. That's what we're here for. Ignite the future generation. We're here to ignite the future generation. That's well said. Mike, Franklin, Tennessee is your hometown, right? No. Is it Franklin?
Livingston.
That's Livingston, I presume. That's right. That's where I see the billboard of you up there in the city, up there, Livingston. Thank you for being here, sir. If you got something you'd like to say to our group here.
I am so grateful for having run across I don't read much email. In fact, most of my friends get frustrated with me because I seldom turn it on. And I turn it on. I was the same way when I was a CEO. My computer never beeped at me. I could beep at it, but it couldn't beep back at me. So I feel just grateful that I found that notification. I called Art and I said something like, "Can I come?" And he said, "Why'd you ask that?" And anyway, I'm really happy I came up here today and listened. And so.
Thank you. You had a lot to do for us. So we'll end this program here with Carshandra Wright, all right, and Sonia Mallard. We're so grateful for us to do a little partnership today. Wasn't without its challenges, but we look forward to doing this again next year. What would you all like to say to our audience?
Well, I go first.
So I would like to thank the MOB, the Museums of Brevard, for bringing our organization together, because without them, we wouldn't have had this collaboration. I'd also like to thank the teachers that showed up for a tour.
Thank you.
And they got to hear the history. Also, I'd love to thank Brenda Bolding for coming out today, because I like the fact that she was the one that painted those pictures that you see that are all colorful, that really brighten our museum. And although this is a heavy topic, it makes it much lighter when people come into our museum and keep painting. I'd also like to thank Darren for coming down and making sure that he was present for what we had to announce and being part of our programming, helping us out, and everybody who came out to learn about the history of the Moors.
Thank you. And Sonia?
I just want to say, usually I have a lot to say, But today, I'm giving Lala the platform to speak on our behalf. But what I do want to say, for all of those that's in our audience that called and came out and was coming for a tour, we have a woman here who last year was her birthday. She was determined, Diane was determined to come out to the Moore Center for her birthday. And unfortunately, we were closed that Saturday. And she called and she was like, listen, are y'all open? It's my birthday. So we want to say happy birthday to you. Thank you for coming back. And Brenda Bolden, again, we count it not robbery because the relationship we have with you and your husband is next to none. And let me tell you something about her. She has hundreds of beautiful paintings. And please be sure to tour the museum, visit the house afterwards. We like to thank Ron Force for being here and helping us. He's our maintenance man and everything else. And Slash doing tours as well. And I want to, again, to acknowledge my boss, Jeff Davis. Please stand up. Yes. If it is not for him, the team here at the Moore Cultural Center would not be as creative and innovative as we could be. And I just want everyone to know this. Mr. Art Edwards is being very humble because he's on our board of directors here at the museum, and they've been doing such a great job. Our president is Mr. William Gary, who's not here today. But I just want to say again, thank you for coming out to the Moore Cultural Center. And Mark, yes, we did this. The space and civil rights came together today, and we burst into the atmosphere. Come on, somebody.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, honey. I love you guys. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody watching us today and here in person, and thank you, Marty, for your excellent work, and Jessica, and a good beta test here and our whole panel discussion. So on behalf of our wonderful museum, led by Karen Conklin, our executive director, and our emeritus board member now, Charlie Mars, who I lovingly call our God, poised to do great things with other organizations like this one, thanks to all your support. So watch our Stay Curious program, and we'll see you again to bridge the space between us. Thank you.